Hey there, this is Dan, the producer for Mark and Carrie. If you like this show, we highly recommend you check out Watson's other podcast, Trending Globally. You'll hear more in-depth conversations about politics and policy from some of the world's leading experts, including, occasionally, Mark and Carrie. You can find us by subscribing to Trending Globally on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Again, that's Trending Globally. All right, on with the show. Thanks.
Well, hello, we're back. And again, second time in person.
I know.
Second time in a row.
Face to face. For those of you who can't see this, which is everyone, we're sitting at a round table, peering over two laptops, talking into identical mics.
Yes, that's right. Without a mask.
Without a mask. But speaking of masks,
yeah.
What's on the top of your mind,
well,
Carrie?
Is it Omicron or Omicron or Abercrombie? Omicron?
I love Abercrombie.
Yeah.
We should call it the Abercrombie virus, because Abercrombie, in a way, was a virus.
It was.
I think it's Omicron. I was struck by the fact that the Times Roundup actually had a how to spell it, or rather how to pronounce it. I think it was the Times Roundup. I was like, isn't it simple? It's Omicron.
It's here. I think it's now in 4 states. Of course, now I think everyone is so used to seeing yet another variant, but this variant seems to be the one that mutates and possibly is transmissible much similar to Delta, but possibly even more. And I was feeling found by South African virologists and public health officials. And I was feeling really bad for South Africa because they actually were public about it. And, Americans would have hit it.
Yeah, no good deed goes unpunished, Volume 7.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I'm so feeling just bad for them. But then, actually, one of my friends who works in South Africa was, the band named several other South African countries like Lesotho and Eswatini. And they were like, wow, we got mentioned. We were so excited. so excited.
Finally recognized because of Omicron. Thanks, Omicron. So, lots of interesting angles on this one, right? So the first one is, in the hopeful story, right, is that basically in order for a virus to survive and persist, it has to replicate more.
Yeah.
But it can't be more lethal at the same time because it will kill the people in which it's replicating and therefore it won't survive. So if you think about the Spanish flu, apparently, I'm sure somebody's going to write to me and tell me this is wrong, but as I understand it, there are bits of the RNA of the Spanish flu running around in the flu that you get today. Okay. Because essentially, yes, it was very, very deadly, but then it kind of it spread more, but was less lethal, and that seems to be a pattern. In which case, the data out of South Africa so far is, loads of people get it, but it's pretty much on the mild symptom side of things. And that's great. That's great news. It's tough if you're in a country that has very low vaccination rates, because then it can get more serious. But even if this thing is more replicable, it doesn't necessarily mean more deadly, and it doesn't necessarily mean what the guy from, I think it was Moderna, said, which is like, this is going to evade things, and we're going to have to get a new one. Well, you would say that if you're on a drug company, right? Yeah. But, is it necessarily the case? So, I don't know. What do you think about this?
$10 trillion in profits weren't enough. Well, I was interested in a couple different things. And I saw some thought pieces about this, where the West really screwed itself on hoarding all the vaccines because we're and boosted and all. But of course, it's going to happen in the countries where there's low vaccination rates, and while the West hoards all of theirs, so you can throw it out at CVS because people aren't getting it.
But that's also happening in South Africa, for example. You've got populations that don't trust their state. What a shocker, right?
Yeah.
Because for them, the state has basically been the guy who runs off with all the cash for a lot of these places, right? And because of that, they've got very low vaccination rates. I mean, vaccine skepticism is not confined to us. Now, of course, that's not to say that us hoarding doesn't matter, but, there are that generic problem everywhere as well.
Yeah. I was curious about travel bans because I think most health officials, they don't really do very much. But then it was interesting to me that the Biden administration came out and said, we're trying to buy ourselves time. So, which seemed like much more nuanced than we're just shutting down the world. But I mean, is travel bans just some sort of weird, screw your neighbor?
Honestly, at this point in time, I just come to the nobody knows anything thing. So I'll give you an example. I think I mentioned this last time. Scotland has a very strong mask, do the mask thing. Yeah. And England has a very lax, who to hell with the mask thing, right? The rates of infection, death, and everything between the two countries, almost identical.
Yeah.
Now, that's
yeah.
not to say that masks don't matter, right? Particularly, suppose, at the start of a pandemic when nobody has any immunity and you've got no drugs. Yeah, sure, put them on, right? Is it making a huge difference now? Maybe if I'm in a plane for 8 hours, it's probably a good idea, but maybe in general circumstances, no. And once you change the game, right, you have a new version of the virus and we don't quite know what it does or whatever. I think they just grasp it like what you did before. It's a very human thing to do.
Yeah.
And, you expect politicians to do things. So what's the first thing you can do? Well, let's just ban travel. Is it going to help? Probably not. Horse, stable, bolted,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
But it's being seen to do something. And it's typical of the Biden administration. It's very thoughtfully done, as you say, right? So we're not going to ban travel. What we're going to do is we're going to require people to have a 24-hour test before they get on a plane. So my nephew is coming from, where is he now? I think he's in Sweden, right?
Okay.
And he's getting a test in Sweden 48 hours out, and he's coming on Sunday because on Monday the new one kicks in and it's 24 hours,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right, and he's flying from Denmark, right, from Copenhagen. You know how much it costs to get a 24-hour test in Copenhagen airport? Basically, it's 4,000 crowns, which is about $800. So in other words,
Holy cow.
they've put on a travel ban.
Yeah.
They just haven't called it that.
Oh, that's interesting. So
Right? Because if
right.
what are you going to do if your test costs more than your ticket? You're not going to take the trip.
A 24-hour PCR test. Holy cow. Yeah.
And imagine Boris Johnson and his mates that run all these clinics that do all the
Yeah.
private tests in
Yeah.
Britain.
Yeah.
They'll just be lying on top of a giant pile of money, rubbing themselves because of this one.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Like, if your relative owns, like, that happens to be the test clinic for whatever. Do you think the UK or Germany, with their high numbers, are going to do? Because you're right, high numbers in terms of people having it, but hospitalizations are not especially high.
Right, exactly. And that could ratchet up, and the whole thing is like not about the death rate, it's about the hospitalization rate. Germany, Austria has led the way, but Germany is actually considering mandatory vaccinations, right? No more whinging.
Yeah.
You're all going to get it or you're going to pay the cost. Now, this has already happened. So my wife just got back from Germany. And she went to Leipzig with the family. And to get into the restaurant they were going to go into, they all had to have a QR code on their phone that showed that they were vaccinated. There's a unique digital certificate for you that's very hard to forge.
And they actually checked.
And they checked,
Yeah.
right? And they check everything. So basically what they're saying is you can be a holdout, but you will have no public life.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because a lot of that feeds into sort of populism in Europe was dying down. This
Yeah.
is like a kind of great
Yeah.
populist, dynamite crack issue.
Well, Angela's gone. Is that right? And
But,
Olaf
yeah,
is in.
Olaf is in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't
Okay.
inspire the name, does it?
Olaf.
I mean, all I think is the snowman in Frozen.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very hard for me to get
Yeah.
past that now.
Well, on to another happy topic, and that is this week at the Supreme Court was one of the top 5 or 3 cases for this court is the healthcare case having to do with Jackson, Mississippi, reproductive rights. And essentially what it does is the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And I did a deep dive into this because I was trying to sort out all the details as I prepped for this. And so fetal viability was set for Roe at 28 weeks. So how long the fetus can survive outside the womb. And even this number was a little bit arbitrary, but so what Mississippi wants to do is to change from 28 weeks to 15 weeks, which would be obviously a big reduction. And then there are all these states that are queued up to move 15, Texas 6 weeks, and just to narrow that window down more and more. It was interesting listening to the argument. The Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts, you can see him he's just trying to go down the middle and talked a lot about this fetal viability. Could it be changed to 15 weeks? While the other conservative justices are like, let's just get rid of the whole thing. And then the left is like, we have to maintain this. So it's just interesting seeing how Roberts is really trying to maintain that middle part.
So here's my question for you. Apart from the fact that this got dumped into their laps, why are they taking this and why are they playing hardball on it? What do you think the conservative justices' game on this? Is it really because Amy is a fundamentalist Catholic, right?
Yeah.
Or is there a different game going on that I can't see?
Well, I did think that same thing, because it's not like Roe hasn't been challenged in the last almost 50 years or in some ways. I think there's that so many states are now lining up with something with much shorter time frames, and so wanting to have something so it's federal law, so there isn't just this patchwork. Though, I mean, I think if they do change it, it'll end up being patchwork anyway. And they have to have some sort of politics in mind too, right? I mean, sort of where the country is. I think, the court, even though we like to think they're insulated from all of this stuff. I mean, they would have had to take a case like this in this cycle or the next. So, I think there's a lot of politics at play too. I mean, the court's much more savvy about this than I think we give them credit for.
So let's explore the politics, right? Is it essentially Republican states want to have these very, very tight restrictions and Democratic states don't?
I think, yeah, essentially.
All
yes.
right. So that's the case then. Is there a kind of electoral game that goes like this? Everything's decided on a knife edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the base something that they really care about that's going to drive the Liberals crazy in my state. And I think in a mobilization campaign, doing this is going to help me maintain control in my state, right? But on the other hand, this could be the thing that saves the Democrats in 22, right? If you basically incite lots of coastal and regional rich metropolitan suburban women over this, that could be the 2% that you need to swing an election as well. So it seems a bit of a high-risk game. How do you think it would play out?
But that's the silver lining, I think. That's what Democrats are hoping as a silver lining out of this, is that it'll mobilize the base coming out, given what happened with the governor's elections and blah, blah, blah this last fall, that'll be the saving. That's what will save their bacon in next fall. But it's super high stakes. And if you look at all the maps in terms of what would happen if Roe is overturned, I mean, the whole middle of the country, those women have very little, if no access to any sort of reproductive health care. And so you're really just talking rich women on the coast or middle class women on the coast. And I mean, that seems deeply problematic. And this was why, of course, the hypocrisy of everybody. But, the same day, this opening argument, then, of course, there's the shooting in Michigan. And you think, like we care about the sanctity of life. And then like all the, the list of things where we don't care about the sanctity of life. And I mean, that sort of runs you down a little bit, I think.
Just to continue this one a little bit, I was struck by the fact that the Democrats weren't arguing the case. They were arguing the legitimacy of the institution.
Yeah.
Right. So don't go there, because if you do, everyone will see us as a bunch of partisan hacks, right? But there is a case to be decided. And if you look at what the Conservative justices are doing, they're basically staying within the terms of the case, the legal framework. Gorsuch, for example, is basically saying, why do we have a federal ruling about a medical procedure, this one, when there isn't one on any other ones, right? Now, I'm not taking a position on this, right? I'm just simply saying there's two different strategies at play here.
Yeah.
And one is like panic the state of the institution. The other one is let's sort of break the law from within in order to change it and get what we want. And I was reminded bizarrely with this, the difference, somebody else wrote this down, I'm totally riffing it, and it reminded me of this, of the difference between the Aubrey trial and the Rittenhouse trial. Mm-hmm. So the Rittenhouse trial prosecution strategy was all about race, and that seemed to fail because essentially lots of factors, that people involved were all white.
Yeah.
The fact that race was obviously a background consideration was not actually what the case was about, etc., right? And that failed. Meanwhile, in the Aubrey case, which was obviously about race, they didn't mention it at all. They just basically played to the facts that this guy was essentially kidnapped, assaulted, and shot, right?
Yeah.
And that's really bad, and that worked. And I'm wondering if there's a similar risk here with the Democrats, that what they're doing is, like, by putting the state of the institution first, they're kind of missing the procedural battleground where this thing would actually be decided. They're not trying to fight the Republicans on their own terms. They're on a different set of terms.
Yeah, that's super interesting because, one of the talking points coming out of Coney Barrett's questioning was the safe haven laws of, one part of the case being argued is that the burden of being a parent, and she said, well, you can drop the baby off at a safe haven and not carry that burden. And Sonia Sotomayor was about the end of democracy. So the nuance of this stuff, just coming at it from totally different perspectives. That is interesting about the medical procedure.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because
they're arguing very micro strategies.
Yeah.
They may or may not be wrapped up in moral claims, but they're basically working within what the law is just now and pushing it. Whereas what the Democrats seem to be doing is completely ignoring this and talking about the legitimacy of the court. And I'm just wondering how that works. I mean, of course, there's a simple partisan majority, etc.
Yeah.
But I mean, is it basically a Hail Mary pass from the Liberals to essentially say, guys, we're not even going to talk about this because you do this and we're all doomed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is that effective? I don't know.
Though it would be interesting because, of course, now we won't know. I mean, talking about the politics until the summer, and that'll be just a few months before the midterm election. So, I mean, you do kind of wonder in the trading back and forth of the decisions whether or not they could start to build some sort of consensus around one of the actual legal question at hand. But I'm sure far smarter people that actually know the law are.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll stop talking about that now. Let's talk about something else we don't really know.
Yeah.
What's next?
Have you been paying attention to the Chinese tennis player?
I think it's been hard to not pay attention to the Chinese tennis player.
I mean, and of course, the Beijing Olympics are coming up, the first day to hold both the summer and the winter. I've been watching it both. I watched it as a tennis fan, but then the WTA actually pulled out of the events that they host in China. I didn't think they hosted very many, but it ends up being a couple, $100 million, which is more than any other, NBA has done. And it's just curious how China has responded, given that the Olympics are coming up in 6 weeks.
So just in case anybody has missed this one, basically what's happened is one of China's top tennis playing athletes accused the senior Politburo member, right at the top of the Communist Party, of very nefarious sexual conduct. And she disappeared. And then she appeared basically after international pressure said, where is she, for a long time. And she appeared on a video, in one of those kind of videos that you'll only ever get out of authoritarian regimes, where everyone's sort of sitting there with a forced smile going, no, everything's fine.
Great.
It's totally great. Don't worry about me. Everything's fine. And of course, everyone's like, this can't possibly be true. Don't know. You think they'd get a better sort of film crew or something to do this stuff?
Wasn't she with her cat or something too? I mean, there was some weird prop.
Oh, really?
I thought
Exactly.
Anyway, I might have made that up.
But, it's an interesting one, how authoritarian regimes deal with those types of legitimacy crises. So, we tend to think about China in terms of, well, it's about growth, right? It's about keeping the growth numbers up. It's about preventing unemployment. It's about stopping the financial system imploding because of real estate collapse, this country called Evergrande, right? But there's also this kind of phenomena of celebrity. Mm-hmm. And, we don't care about, for example, particular minorities being oppressed or whatever. Well, we do, but that's sort of flash in the pan. But when you get somebody who's dead famous and they disappear, it seems to galvanize attention on these things in a very interesting way that's really uncomfortable for these regimes. I'm not sure they have good coping strategies for it.
And that person literally becomes the face of it too. And so then you're right. The coping is just like some throwback terrible video with a backdrop that is like from the 1950s or something.
And also, I mean, what do you think it says about sort of, a Me Too moment for China?
Well, that's what I thought was really interesting, is that clearly there's a lot of dirty laundry in the Chinese Communist Party. And will we ever get the behind the scenes on that? But that China is, if they ever allow for a Me Too movement, holy cow, there'd be a whole,
Yes, they'd be quite, if they would ever allow. And I think the question, the answer is in the way that you phrased that question. I think that's
might be right up there with Putin, and Russia's non-existent Me Too movement. But I did think what bravery it took to say that too, and knowing, she knew.
Oh yeah, I mean, once you send that tweet, right, you just count down until they knock on the door.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
and they disappear you.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is exactly what happened. And then they had to reappear you. That's the interesting thing.
Where did they go? Where do you think they send her?
I really have no idea.
Like to Siberia? I mean, you just like, where does she go? Yeah.
Probably to a hotel somewhere. It's really crap.
With the other people who
other people who've disappeared. Yeah. There's an entire chain of hotels. It's sort of like, basically it's a B-grade, all-you-can-eat self-service restaurant with armed guards. So in other words, it's Jamaica, right? It's Jamaica with the sun. Sorry about Jamaica. Sorry about that, Jamaica, but you know where I'm. All right. What else happened this week?
Why is the economy, so jobs numbers just came out, 210,000 jobs.
As opposed to the 550 that people estimated.
Yes, exactly.
By the way, these estimates are almost always wrong, but that's a different story.
Why do we feel so bad about the economy, but it seems to be okay?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So the Financial Times has a great newsletter called Unhedged by this guy called Robert Armstrong and his co-writer Ethan Wu. And they had a piece on this morning, which was really, really great. I encourage people to read it if they can get a hold of it. But, their basic thing is if you look at the actual indicators, you're back on trend growth, you're back on trend unemployment, but why is everybody miserable? And, you can get into this thing about the confidence index versus the sentiment factors and forward-looking versus backward-looking. I actually think this is a much simpler explanation, which is the following. 70% of the people who voted for the other guy last time think the election was stolen.
Okay.
Do you think in surveys they're going to give you any credit for the economy?
Yeah, right.
Right.
Zero.
So the economy is doing fine. No, it's not. Biden's in charge.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen this before, right? It's partisan sorting, right?
Yeah.
You simply discount any information that doesn't go with your partisan priors, right? So that to me would take care of a great deal of it, particularly because you don't really see the same things in other countries.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look internationally, I mean, surely you got the same supply side problems, you got the same supply side shocks, you got the supply chain problems, you got the inflation factors, you got all that sort of stuff, right? But you don't have this sort of massive disconnect that shows up between how the economy is performing and sentiment. And even in countries like Britain, where the economy is not doing that well, you don't have as much angst about the economy as you do in the United States, where it's actually doing better.
Yeah, and I guess it's just this thought of I know it doesn't make any sense, but I thought that things would be better. I wouldn't have to wear a mask inside, and I could go to Jamaica without getting 10 tests at $800 million, and all this other, and it hasn't. So I'm like, well, this is the problem then.
Right. But here's the thing. I mean, you know, I at least live in Rhode Island. You live somewhere else most of the time, right?
Different time dimension.
But even where you live, right? I mean, do you really notice it? Do you notice the oppression? Do you feel like, you know, your freedom's being trampled on because every now and again I have to pop on a mask, right? No, because again, partisan sorting. I don't think things were stolen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And because of that, I'm inclined to believe the numbers that come out of the Department of Labor, right? But maybe other people filter these things out.
Well, I guess I think it's bad because I read the front page of the New York Times and it tells me that it's bad, and I have to think, well, wait, is it really that bad? I mean,
I know. It's just like, can they just stop? I mean, like, I know basically the coronavirus update that you get from the New York Times in your email every morning at like 10 minutes to 7, right? Yeah, I mean, I happen to be like doom scrolling in bed when I wake up like everybody else, right? And this thing is just horrible. It's just like, it's always bad. Maybe there's an upside, but it's always bad, and it just means bad. And it's just like, for God's sake, I mean, you know, hardly anybody's dying of it. Can we just stop this?
I know. What do you think about the Great Resignation, that everyone's leaving their jobs and have found, like, you know, they want more work-life balance? I don't know, maybe you're thinking about leaving your job.
I mean, I think about it every day.
But I'm assuming pre-COVID, you were thinking about it.
I've been thinking about it for a long time, actually. Yeah, but
what's your take on that? I think that it's I
think it's mainly bullshit.
Oh, you do? So it's just not...
Well, here's some facts on it, right? Actual facts.
Yeah.
It involves 3% of the labor market, which means 97% are not involved in the Great Resignation. So could you imagine, what would be the amazingly big resignation? 5%?
Yeah.
What would be the resignation beyond limits?
The
Omega resignation, 7%. So anyway, it's 3%, right?
Yeah.
A lot of this has to do with women leaving the labor market. So the labour force participation rate is down. The latest figures has it going up a little bit. But a large part of that is something that Biden's second bill, the one that we'll never, ever see daylight, wants to address, which is childcare, right? So a lot of this is the pandemic, and prior to the pandemic, stock market growth meant that upper middle class women who work can basically look at that 401k and go, to hell with this, I'm out, right? And that's part of it, right? Then you look at middle class and working class women, and they've always had this choice, which is, do I work to pay for childcare?
Yeah.
And back in the day when it was fun and we had office parties and we could hang out and my friends were there, now it's miserable and I have to wear a mask all the time and everyone's shit to me. Forget about it. I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
There's a great way of thinking about this with truck drivers. There was a nice piece, I can't remember where I read it, but it's talking about Britain. And in the old days, when things were normal, right, this is a really hard job, right? It's bad for your back. It's bad for your system. You don't get any exercise. You eat crap food. But they would make things bearable for you. Like in the supermarket, when you were dropping off and they were unloading the truck, they'd have a room for the truck drivers and they'd have some tea and sandwiches. You could even catch a little bit of sleep, this sort of stuff. Now with COVID, all this is banned, right? So basically, a bad job became a horrible job.
Yeah.
So even if you're going to say, well, but we're paying you $3 an hour more, it's like, well, off peak, I'm getting paid a third less than I was in the 90s.
Right.
You're giving me $3 more and the job sucks even more, right?
Right.
So, you know, you put all those factors together, yeah, you get 3%. The notion is a Great Resignation. 97% aren't doing this. This is silly.
Yeah. Well, and to your point just about like higher wages, that the service workers getting paid like gobs of money, and you're like, no, it's still not. Yeah,
it's horrible. I mean, you know, I mean, the worst one, think about, you know, the poor people that work in airplanes.
I know,
right? Who are en masse all day with forced blast air conditioning and get punched in the face by idiots, right? I mean, have they doubled their wages?
Yeah.
Have they tripled their wages? No, absolutely not.
Because now they're also like healthcare workers and therapists and like
right, exactly.
social
and
workers.
this huge burnout amongst those communities because essentially they are your frontline workers, right?
Yeah.
And the thing about, we know this with soldiers, right? Being on the front line is exhausting. You need to rotate them off and put other people in their place.
Yeah.
And we're just not doing that. So guess what? Some of them are quitting.
Yeah. On Build Back Better, my theory is nothing's going to happen before the holiday. Congress will leave for winter break, and then just before the State of the Union, which is only 6 weeks away for those of you who are counting, we'll get movement on it at that point.
I actually think that what happens is that our two senators in Arizona and West Virginia they've made lots of noises, they've made promises, whatever. I think those promises are worth about as much as, I don't know, the Versailles Treaty.
Okay.
Right? I just don't think they're going to go for it, and I think that it'll never see daylight.
Okay. Anyway, have you watched the new Dune movie?
I have.
Well, wait. Did you watch the old Dune movie from the 80s with Sting?
Yes.
And
Did I
Kyle
watch
MacLachlan?
that just before it, just to have a comparison in my head? Oh yeah.
Oh, you did.
And it's David Lynch.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I forgot this. It's David Lynch, so it's utterly mad.
I mean, we were talking about this at Thanksgiving and how crazy and weird it was.
Oh yeah, I mean,
haven't
the whole
watched it.
thing.
I need to watch it.
It's got a Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart with hair.
Yeah.
That was the bit that freaked the hell out of me. I was like, oh my God, that's Captain Picard with hair. What's going on with that?
Oh, that's it. So did you? I thought the new one was quite entertaining, actually.
The new one was good, but I mean, it's that classic thing of what they've done. I mean, what they did with the original is like they tried to tell the arc of the book, right?
Yeah.
And what they did with this one is kind of cut it in half.
Yes.
So they did a Hobbit with it, right?
Yeah.
Now, at the end of the day, the Hobbit's a cute little story for kids, right? Sorry if you think it's more than that. It's not, right? And then when Jackson got a hold of it and turned it into 3 movies, you're like, oh, come on, really?
Yeah.
And that I just couldn't do it. And it's kind of like that with Dune. It's sort of, apart from the entire sort of House Atreides getting massacred, sorry, spoiler alert, apart from the House Atreides getting massacred, right, nothing much happens.
No, and you're just like, oh, but is anything going to get resolved? And it
no,
doesn't.
exactly. So at the end of the day, did I like Sting and Leather being mental and cackling under the direction of David Lynch more? I would strongly encourage everyone to go back and have a look at it, because you know another film that's epically bonkers that nobody watches?
What's that?
You've got to go back and watch Flash.
Really?
Flash Gordon, 1980. It is utterly insane.
Who's Flash?
Flash Gordon, you don't remember?
No, but I mean, who plays?
Oh, it's somebody you've never heard of. Now, he had no career afterwards, right? I mean, the only person I recognised was the Welsh actor Brian Blessed, who plays Prince Baron, right? And it's just mad. I mean, it's completely mad.
Okay, I'm going to put that. But actually, this is a good transition because we are going to do an end of the year. It's on our calendars, so we can't avoid it.
That's it.
And we can do our end of the year recommendations.
We can do our end of year recommendations, which, of course, we can start now with the ultimate Christmas movie, which always is...
Love Actually?
No.
Then I don't know.
Die Hard.
Oh, yes. Yes. You can tell that we think very differently about what a holiday movie
Yippee-ki-yay.
We'll leave it there.
We'll leave it there. Till Christmas.
See you soon.
Jingle bells.
Thanks, everybody.